Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Art of the Possible series. I'm Nihali Niyogi, and I am a Principal Cloud Solution Architect at Microsoft. And with me, I have my peer, Eric, who is also a Principal Cloud Solution Architect, and he is from the App Dev team. Eric brings a unique perspective with the background in both networking and the App Dev side. Today's topic is Azure Container App Networking Deep Dive, and this is part 2. Let me bring up the official documentation here. This is the topic for today. Today we're going to do deep dive and we're going to run some demos, validations, portal experience will be in the draw.io, and we'll also show you some troubleshooting tips. In part 1, we covered the overall architecture and use cases with both external and internal mode. So with that, welcome, Eric. Would you like to add anything to our vision and agenda for today's session?
Thanks, Nahali. No, I'm just really happy to be here, and I'm a visual learner, so having the documentation is fantastic, but having this opportunity to go over the different scenarios, visually through the portal and through Draw.io, I think is a great way to learn even more about ACA and its network capabilities.
Excellent. Thanks, Eric. So let me start with the Draw.io. So if you've been following along with me in this journey, this screen will look familiar to you. Again, these are all reusable architectures downloadable from my GitHub repo link below. And today's topic is Azure Container App Networking. Throughout the course of this session, we'll be navigating these layers to show you various scenarios. And our starting point usually is this hybrid cloud architecture, the top blue box being Azure, the bottom yellow box being on-prem, connected with some sort of private connectivity. In this case, I have represented ExpressRoute. And the tab of interest for today is container app. It is integrated with my AKS Draw.io. I may decide to split this, but for now it is in the AKS.Draw.io file. Okay. So let's start with the first scenario, which is the external mode. And again, I'll be jumping between Draw.io, Azure Portal, and some CLI to show you various validations. And in this diagram, also another important point to note is we have three personas. This is the red user being external. This green user would be the user that is within a VM in Azure. And of course, this is a user across private connectivity, a branch user. Okay, so I'll be running quite a few validations from this VM as well. So again, back to the first mode, external mode. So let's start with scenario number 1, external mode. So when you deploy an Azure Container App, behind the scene, it also deploys an Azure Container App environment. And that's the red box over here. And this is the Azure Container App itself. And it also deploys an external load balancer. If I show you what that portal experience looks like, I do have a screen capture here, and we'll go in the portal as well. But when you create a container app environment, you get prompted to choose internal versus external. And this is the external use case that we're working on right now. And you could see that with the recent release, you'll also see the private endpoints in the portal experience now. So with that, let me show you how the flows would work. And the flows would work something like this. The user will hit the external load balancer and in turn hit the container app. Eric, anything you would like to add to this scenario?
No, it's a pretty simple scenario. It's out of the box, it just works. So
Yeah.
this
Couple things that I'd like to mention that when I do the demo, I do have a pre-created subnet. That's where we're going to create the external container app. And then, of course, there are pre-created subnets as we progress through the sessions. I have private endpoint subnet, app gateway subnet, management subnet where the user is, and then the firewall subnet. So that's what this these different slices are showing, that the VNet is sliced into different subnets. So let's go ahead and create our first container app, again, a public or external one, using the portal. So I'm going to jump back into the portal here. So um, I've already created a resource group called ACA Demo Public, and then I have a VNet with a subnet already created. And there are certain best practices about this that we'll talk about. Let's go ahead and create a new container app. So this is the portal experience. We'll create a brand new one and we'll call it ACA Demo Public. And let's create a new container app environment, and we will call this -env. And there are a couple of things that are of interest in here. Remember the red box that I showed you before. And here you have the opportunity to integrate with the virtual network. So we will integrate it with the virtual network. And I have the subnet. Um, There is also another method where you do not want to integrate it with the virtual network. Eric, anything you want to add about that use case? I know it's not very common, but we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like this is like a great way of, when you want to incorporate, Azure Container Apps within your own virtual network. But if you do pick no, then it becomes a managed VNet, and it's kind of like managed by Azure in the background. So just be aware that if you want to make any changes or uh, make it larger, the subnet or anything like that, you won't be able to do that with a managed subnet or managed VNet, sorry. So it's good to keep in mind that it's best to probably integrate it into your own virtual networks. That way you can manage the entire infrastructure.
Excellent. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, and here is where you first pick. So the experience looks something like this. You first pick enable public network access enable, and this is where you pick the internal versus external. And with external behind the scenes, it provisions the external load balancer. So let's go ahead and hit create here, and then we'll run through the rest of the creation process. We'll use Docker Hub. For this experience, I'm just going to choose Nginx :latest, and we'll go ahead and enable ingress, and we'll accept traffic from everywhere for us to hit it publicly. And we'll talk about this as well, limited to container app environment. But for this experience, we'll select this, and let's go in. Anything else on this screen, Eric, before I to call out before I hit create?
Um, Just on the ingress part, just to be aware is that, underneath the capability, it's Envoy proxy. So if you're familiar with Kubernetes and using Envoy, that is what's going to be done here. It is it's managed on your behalf, so there's less configuration. But if you're looking at how ingress is being configured or what capabilities are available, it's Envoy proxy underneath.
Good point. Thanks, Eric. Right, so we'll hit create. And while that's creating, so like Eric mentioned, so the Envoy proxy would be somewhere in here, right, Eric?
Yeah, like that's correct. Like you won't be able to see it. So again, it's abstracted from the view.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, so we just kicked off the creation of a container app um, with external load balancer, and we'll go and run some validations. But while we're waiting, let's talk about a new feature that got recently in preview is you can, if this is not the desired behavior, public access to your container app, you can project the private endpoint for this container app into a private endpoint subnet, and then the flows would look something like this. So let me turn off the public flows. So when you enable private endpoint, this user can directly access the container app using the private endpoint, and likewise, this user can access it. Pretty simple. Create a private endpoint and show you the demo for this container app. Um, and then let's go check if our container app is created. The deployment is still in progress. So while we wait, let's talk through the next scenario. So the next scenario is like I mentioned, if you have private endpoints, you can hit it privately. But what if you want to access this through from the public internet? So one of the things that you can do is you could use Front Door, and with Front Door, you could set up the container app as the origin. There's a lot of manual steps involved in this configuration. So let me call out a few things over here. So when you use Front Door with Azure Container App, as called out in this limitation, and is that it is only supported through PowerShell and AzCLI. And I'll show you the link to the documentation as well. It's hyperlinked here as well. So what you need at a high level, what you need to do is think of this container app as the provider. So you need to create a private link service, and then from the Azure portal, you can create up until the endpoint, but when it comes to the origin group, you need to definitely use the PowerShell or AzCLI. In the interest of time, I've already executed the steps. So the way this would work is this user would would hit Front Door, and then you have a private link service and private endpoint behind the scene, and then you can access it publicly. Okay, and of course, custom domain is also supported. I will do a demo of custom domain because it's often a step that our customers need help with. So I'll demo the custom domain as well. So with that, I'll pause here. Eric, anything you want to add to the Front Door scenario and where we would see this?
Yeah, like No, I don't really have anything to add, you know. I think it's a great call out, you know, because there are some limitations and preview features, you know, not to use it in production. Um, so yeah, so no, this is a great flow.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so let's go see if our container app is provisioned, and it is. So let's go to the resource. And like Eric said, it's just supposed to work. So we'll just click this and see what happens. Yay, it does just
Yay.
work. So this is the external mode. Now let me show you the private endpoint bits, and let's just do some validations while we are here. So let's go first to the container app environment. And in the container app environment, notice that networking preview, and you could see that if you disable the public access here, let's go ahead and do that. For you to enable private endpoint, we do have to disable public access. So we'll go ahead and hit apply. And this is where I want to show you the private endpoint experience. And so while we wait, let's go ahead and let's go ahead and look at the ingress bits. So here, we had ingress enabled, accepting traffic from everywhere, and this was the endpoint that we just tested. And for us, we'll wait over here to see the private endpoint feature. Okay, okay, so let's refresh the screen. Okay, so now as you can see that after we disable all incoming traffic from the public internet, that's when the private endpoint gets lighted up. So now we're ready to do the private endpoint. So let me show you, again, this is a preview feature, but let's go ahead and add a private endpoint. So we'll choose the express mode, and then we say is the demo dash PEP, and we'll project it in a hub network, and I already have a private endpoint subnet, and we'll say your private and will be integrated with an existing I already have a DNS zone like container Azure Container Apps.io, so it will be integrated with that. Now this part is important, and we'll show you the DNS integration bits as we progress through this demo. So let me open up the DNS as well. And, and as you could see that I have a container apps .io and we'll wait for the private endpoints to get projected over here. All right, so looks like it just finished. And let's refresh the screen, and we can see that our private endpoint is now projected. So let's just I'm going to jump back on this VM and we'll run some validation. So let's grab the the FQDN, and let's do some testing. So we'll go to the overview page and we'll grab this FQDN. Let me jump on the VM here. I'll just do first, let's do a dig on this FQDN. And sure enough, we can see that we get the private IP. And then now let's run a curl against that, and it should work. Again, we are accessing this privately after the private endpoint was created. So there we have it. It just took a few seconds, but now we are accessing this privately. Okay, so this is again a new a private endpoint, a new feature. So kind of jumping back to what we just did, we projected the private endpoint and we just tested this flow. Okay, and again, with front door, there is a lot of steps involved for the PLS. So in the interest of time, I won't be demoing that part, but I'll show you an existing front door configuration. So with that, I'll pause here before we go into the front door demo. Anything you'd like to add, Eric, for our demo?
Um, just about the private endpoints.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think, like you mentioned before, it is a preview feature, so you have to take that into consideration. And just in the deployment process, it could take a little bit of time for it to be configured. So, you may just need a little bit of patience. It's not instantaneous, in terms of a deployment right now.
Yeah, we did pause the recording to show it, but it did take some time. Good call out, Eric. Yeah, so now let's talk about the front door. So from now on, I will be using one of my existing container apps. So let me show you that. So this is the one that we just created. Oops, I have a typo over here. I have ACD, but it was supposed to be ACA. But from now on, we will be using this one, which is the public one, and these two are the internal ones. We'll be using that later. So let's look at the configuration for front door. So for front door, we'll look at it both from the container um, app side as well as we'll look at it from the front door side. So one thing to notice here is let's go in the container app environment, networking, and you'll see that I have two private endpoints. So this is often gets a little confusing, so I want to elaborate on this. So there are two private endpoints. The reason there are two is this one is projected in the customer's VNet. So in other words, this is this one right here. However, this one we don't have access to it because it's projected in the AFD Azure Front Door managed VNet. So let me give you a visual of that as well. So I want to make a distinction between those two private endpoints. So this is the private endpoint that we don't have access to. And that's where the integration between front door and container app is done using PLS. And the private endpoint gets projected in the managed VNet where we don't have access to. And so that's an important thing to observe. And then let's look at the end-to-end flows. So we'll jump on the front door side Next, anything you want to add, Eric, on the container app side of the integration here?
No, that was a great call out about the private endpoints. But no, it's I don't have anything to add at this point.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so let's look at the front door side of the house now. So in front door, um, I already had a profile. So the workflow with front door is if you have a profile, you would start with creating an endpoint. So first off, I've created an endpoint for the private endpoint demo over here. And you can see that I have an origin group here, and that origin group, again, this is done through AZCLI. So let's look at the origin group, and we can look at the origin group here. And that origin group is pointing to the container app here. That's the observation there. And then lastly, we could look at the route. So if I go to the front door manager, right. So let's go to the right endpoint over here. Our endpoint in question is the PE demo. And once we click on the PE demo, you'll see that it's associated to the PE demo origin group, and behind the scene that is integrated using PLS with the container app. So let's do some validation. So let's grab this endpoint. So I'm going to grab this endpoint and we'll run the validation through the command line. So here I am. Now we are in the front door. So I just grabbed the endpoint. I believe I do have it already here ready to go. So we could just grab this and run the curl command. And there now we are going to the container app through afd.net. So that's front door. Okay, so that's using the generic, the out-of-the-box domain, as you could see over here. Let's go, I'll show you where the domain integration happens. This is with the default domain. Right, so now let's see if we want a custom domain, how do we go about doing that? I'm going to demo this bit because we do see questions from our customers about that. So let's go ahead and create a custom domain. So here we will create a custom domain. I do own this domain called penguintrails.com. So we will create a custom domain here. We will say, and my domain again is hosted in a public DNS zone in Azure. So we'll do all of the bits on that side as well. So to add a custom domain, there are a couple steps, but let's go ahead and first create this domain. There is a difference between non-Azure validated domain and Azure pre-validated domain. For this scenario, we'll do Azure non-Azure validated, and we'll add this domain. So let's see what this experience looks like. So when I do this add, there are certain steps that need to be done on my public DNS zone for penguintrails.com as well. But the portal experience walks us through that. So I'll pause the recording here till this finishes. Okay. All right. So it looks like our custom domain creation just got finished. And let's refresh the screen over here. And as you can see that the domain that we just created, the AFD container app penguintrails.com, is in the pending state. So the portal experience walks us through what needs to happen next. And so as you can see, it wants us to create a text record, a TXT record to validate the custom domain ownership. So let's go to and the public DNS zone for penguintrails.com. Again, it's hosted in a different subscription in Azure. Let's make sure that nothing exists over here for that. And let's add a record set. So we'll copy the record name from here. And we'll create a record set. And remember to not append this. I did this once before. And text record, and we'll grab the value. We'll put the value in here. Okay, so that needs to happen first. We'll go ahead and hit add over here. And then we also need to add a CNAME record. So the CNAME record will point to the native AFD domain. So let's go back in Azure Front Door. And our domain, our endpoint in question, not to confuse with this one, our endpoint in question is the PE demo. So let's grab this endpoint. You can also get it from here. It's the same endpoint. So we'll grab this endpoint, and that's the CNAME record. Okay, so we'll do that, and then we'll hit add. So that's the piece that needs to be done where you have your public DNS zone. It could be GoDaddy, anything, wherever you're hosting your domain. In my case, I'm hosting it in a public DNS zone in Azure. All right, so here we go. Let's look at our domain again, and let's see if it's validated. So it may take a little bit. Sometimes I've seen, let's see, let's just make sure that our text record, did we add the text record? Let me delete this. Let's add it again. Not sure if it's the order of execution, but let's just add the text record again. And we'll grab the It should only take a few minutes, so let's just make sure that that happens. And let's refresh it. Demo gods, Eric, what do you think? So let's see.
Probably just needs 1 minute to kind of go through this, and I think this is kind of like important, why we're highlighting, like the steps here is that, it does take a little bit to get this configured properly, and hopefully, like the demo gods will agree with us and and approve. There you go. So we have one approved. There you go.
Awesome. So now it's approved. Yeah. And so I've seen a couple of times where I just waited quite a bit, and I realized that one of the mistakes that I had done, and it's in the troubleshooting section as well, but I might just call it out, is I had I had appended the penguintrails.com twice, and that was the mistake I had done. All right, so now that it's approved, you could see that the portal experience does walk you through that. It tells you that it's not associated. So now Everything else looks good. I do want to call out the certificate part here, that the certificate is AFD managed. You could, of course, bring your own certificate as well. So let's go ahead and associate this. You could do it right there, and we'll associate with the container app PE demo, and then we'll associate it with the route. So the moment you do that, we should be able to hit it using the custom domain. So once this is finished, we'll jump back into the CLI and into the um, VM and validate it from there. So I'll pause the recording here. All right, so looks like our domain is now associated. We have an association over here. So let's run some validation. First, we will verify that the CNAME record exists for this that we created, and then we'll um, hit it using the custom domain. So coming back to the VM, and of course for this particular test, we don't have to be inside, but let's run some validation here. So first we'll run the dig command. This should be the CNAME. We expect this to be the CNAME. We'll run it without the short. And you could see that it's a CNAME to AFD.NET. And if we hit it using the curl command, should be able to hit it. And we should also be able to hit this from outside. This is of course inside the VM, but if we put this, we can hit it from outside. So that's the end-to-end demo that we just did with a custom domain. So you have a custom domain, and this user is hitting front door and going all the way to the container app. Anything, Eric, you want to add to this demo? Anything you want to call out here?
Yeah, like this is a great demo of Front Door, and I don't really have anything to add, but just to say Azure Front Door is a fantastic service to accelerate your application, be it within a region or a multi-region. And there's a lot of capabilities that are built into the product as well. So not in scope of this video, but definitely, this is something that is used in production, the front door component, and, to make it's great.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, and I think that finishes our first scenario, which is coming back into Draw.io. This is all this action happening with external mode. Of course, some of the things that we showed you today are in preview. So and with that, we will jump into the next scenario. So let's go into the internal mode. So with internal mode, you will notice that an internal LB gets provisioned behind the scene, and you could, of course, have multiple container app. So the green box is the container environment, which is within a container, which is within a subnet in Azure. So the green box is the container app environment, and this is a container app. And you could also have another container app within the same environment. So in this case, as you could see, strictly from a flow perspective, you could lock this down to just being within the container app environment. So let me show you that portal experience a little bit deeper. And so in this scenario, I have two container apps. I have this app, which is a Python app, which is limited to the VNet. And by limited to the VNet, what it allows us to do is it could access the internal load balancer can access this with this app. And the red is a container app. As you could see, it says limited to the container app. So that's where this flow comes into play, right? So with internal app, it's pretty locked down. So there's no these flows would show that these users could access the internal LB and in turn access the container app. So with that, anything, Eric, you would like to add? I know there's some bits over here. There is an Envoy proxy over here as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Envoy is kind of like your ingress into container apps. And as you mentioned, by doing the Redis connection, in this example, you're kind of isolating the Redis service within the container apps environment, so that way it's not accessible outside of that specific, area.
Yeah. And so let me show you another important bit here as the next layer, as we light up the next layer here, is that anytime you do this kind of internal load balancer integration, you need to deploy and create this private DNS zone for the DNS to work correctly. In other words, you create a DNS zone and create this A record, and this A record is nothing but the IP of the static IP of this internal load balancer. And remember to do this VNet link, hub VNet link. So that's what this VNet link is showing. This is a critical piece. It's also documented in here. So if you're using this Draw.io and click on this link, it will take you right to how this is done. Okay, so that's really an important piece. And of course, anytime you use this and you want to use it from on-prem, I've done deep dive videos on on-prem integration, but you do need to set up your DNS forwarders correctly for your users to access the container app properly. Anything on the DNS side? I know, Eric, we've been burnt by this before with various customers.
Yeah, such a critical step. It's a foundational component, to any, networking or, technology implementation. So, this is, this is one of those areas where you kind of get bitten, and to take the time to properly read the documentation and to make sure that all the DNS configurations are done, and are flowing from wherever you need to access it, being on-prem or within Azure or beyond. So.
Yes, and there is documentation. You do have to read between the lines here. So I've put some screen captures to facilitate that. And then let's hide this DNS layer, but be sure to set it up correctly. And then we're seeing this integration recently. So I've incorporated this in the demo. And essentially, if you have an AI service that your app needs to call privately, you can project the private endpoint for the AI service, and then this app can access it through the private endpoint. And again, remember that this demo app is limited to the VNet, so it can access the private endpoint. And so, of course, there is DNS that is associated with AI service as well. I've done a separate video on AI service networking, but just for completeness, over here, these are the two private DNS zone gets provisioned. The cognitive services, Azure.com and OpenAI, Azure.com. There is a full deep dive video on AI service private endpoint. So with that, what I want to show you here is that this Python app and Redis app are downloadable from my Docker Hub repo link below. And essentially what it does is we'll see it in the demo, but it actually calls the AI service to get fortune. So I have incorporated chat completion over there, and it will get the fortune, and it would load it and save it in a Redis cache. The app is very, very simple. If I have time, I'll create another video on how I created the app. But basically, I used ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot to build that app, and I'll share it in the future video. So with that, let me show you now the flows. The way the flows would work is the user will hit this internal load balancer, which will hit this app, and then the Redis cache to populate the data. So that's how the app is configured, and then we will no longer have access to the internal LB. In the next layers, I'll show you how to access this publicly if needed. But before we go there, let's run some validations over here. For us to get this working correctly end to end, there are lots of validations that can be done. The other thing that I've done with these two, these are Docker containers. Uh, and what I've done is I've installed a lot of tools on these containers. So be sure to check those out. They do help in the troubleshooting. So now I'm going to go jump in the portal to show you these apps. So let's go in the container app. So we'll go in the container apps. And we are now in the demo Python app. We'll start with the container app environment. I did show you some screen captures. Where we have two container apps, demo, Python, and Redis. And if we go to networking, you could see that its public access is disabled, and we don't have private endpoints here. And we will go to the ingress. And you could see that it's limited to the VNet. And the important point here is the target port. So that's the port that's exposed on my container. So that one is important, and you will see that in the Redis one, I have the 6379 as the target port and the exposed port. So this is target and exposed because the app will be talking to it on that port. Anything you would like to add, Eric? I know these are very critical steps to validate.
No, you did a great call out on like the different ports and the configuration. There's not much I can add on this point, unfortunately.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, and let's run some validations here and see what it looks like. So first time I deployed the app, I got stuck. It wasn't working. So let me show you how you can run some validation. So there are two important things over here. There is this log stream where you could see of course, the logs, and then there is the console where you can actually SSH or have a bash shell into the app. So there we are in the app. And I've installed a lot of tools in this container, so we can run like ifconfig, or we could do curl local host colon 5000 / get fortune. Perfect. So this one's working. So these are some of the tests that you can do first locally before you go and hit it from this VM. So before we go and run curl commands from this VM, what I'm doing, showing you is validations from the console itself. Okay, so that's the first thing that has to work. The other thing to call out is I've also installed Redis CLI -h Redis, and you can see that I can talk to Redis now. The DNS resolution here becomes important, and the way to validate that it is indeed using this host name is if you go back, let me open this in a new tab. Um, If you look at the ingress for Redis, it over here, your endpoint is this. So be sure to use that correctly. And the way this one is set up for my app is, if I go again in my app, it, it's under the Redis host gets passed in as an environment variable. So if you go to my container, and environment variables. These are the different environment variables that you can pass. Of course, this is a lab environment, so what this actually shows you how to do the different, how to pass the different variables and um, validate that it's indeed working locally before you go into the VM and validate. So here everything looks great. We validated the connection to Redis, and on the Redis container itself, you could also go into the console, and there are commands that you can run. I've installed some classic network troubleshooting commands that you can use to run some tests. So with that, we are ready to run the test from the VM. So let's grab the container app here. And there is no private endpoint involved in this scenario. As you saw, we didn't enable private endpoint. So this is really a test from this is really a test to the internal load balancer. So let's first do an NS lookup, and so we'll do. I just want to make sure that it's the same. So we'll just do either a dig or NS lookup. And what this should show us is the IP address of the internal load balancer. And then the way this is working is by the virtue of that private DNS zone and the VNet link. So let me show you both of those in the portal. So if you go to load balancers, and you can see that this is that load balancer, the demo container app. Internal load balancer, and you can see the private endpoint is 29.45, and that was indeed the one that was resolved over here to on 72.16.29.45. And the way this is working is by the virtue of private DNS zone that we created manually. And this is the one that's the important one that you have to create manually, and this is the A record that I created. And again, like I showed you in the draw IO, this you do have to create this manually. Anything, Eric, you want to add to any other validations that we should do here? Let me just double check. Anything else?
No, actually, I love the call out for the private DNS zone, because nobody's going to remember an IP address. So, having that configured for ease of use for users is fantastic. And I really like how you showed kind of like those, the troubleshooting from the console standpoint, because that's really, really important because especially when you're starting out with anything new and it's not working properly, you know, having those steps to troubleshoot is fantastic. So that's a great call out.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, you just reminded me of something. So one of the other things that when I was labbing this, I had trouble with was getting the AI service endpoint to work correctly. So the same thing that we did, let's also try to resolve this private endpoint, and it should resolve to a private IP from this console. So here I am in the demo container app, and we will go to the console again. And by the virtue of this being a private endpoint, let's try to paste the NS lookup for the AI Studio private endpoint, and indeed we get the private IP. The important thing to note here is that the ingress for the demo Python app has to be limited to the VNet so that it can access the private endpoint for the OpenAI service. So what we just did was we just tested that this pink flow that from the app we can connect to the AI service. And that's how everything is talking. So now let's do the final test over here. So let's do the validation with the curl command. So I'll grab the URL from here. And this is the final validation. So we'll just do curl, and we'll just have this. We'll just hit this and get fortune. And that's how we are getting it privately. And so we can, again, this should resolve to the load balancer IP. So we'll just do one more. We'll just do one more validation. And yeah, this is the load balancer IP. So that's the end-to-end demo. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything else before we go into the app gateway. Yeah, that's it. I think we're ready to go to the app gateway. Any other validations?
Nope, you bang on.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I added a few of these as I was learning myself, and all of these tools are available. So be sure to check out the app from my Docker Hub repo. Right. So with that, we're ready to jump on to the app gateway integration. Now let's talk about the why before we talk about the app gateway. So what we just showed was we had an AI service and we had this user connecting to the internal load balancer, all happening privately. If this is the desired behavior, this is pretty locked down and it works great. But for some customers, we do get the request that we want to access this from externally. So what are our options for that? So let's look at our options. So I'll hide the private connectivity. I'll leave this. One way to access this service externally is to drop the application gateway. And the way the flows would work is the user would hit the application gateway and in turn, and this internal LB would be the backend to the application gateway, and then the external user can access our container app. All right, so let's go ahead and run some validations and see how this can be done. Of course, you can do custom domain with application gateways. Gateway as well. So first I will take you to the application gateway and show you some important bits of the configuration, and then we will validate it as an external user. So here, let's go and go in the portal. Before I know it, I will have lots of tabs open, Eric. uh,
Don't we all? Don't we all?
yeah, yeah. And so in the app gateway, the most important bit of the configuration is that first you have the the backend pool, but in the backend pool, you would add the container app and you would add the FQDN of the container app. As you could see, I have added the FQDN, and the reason it works, and this is a very important call out, the reason it works is by the virtue of this private DNS zone that I showed you earlier. It's because when you add the FQDN as the backend, this orange flow, this gateway knows about how to resolve it by the virtue of this VNet link. So this piece is very important before you put the FQDN for the container app in the backend. So that's what this orange flow is that backend. So coming back over here, that's this FUDN. And and I did this mistake once, and Eric, probably you could shed more light on it. But what happened was um, as you as you kind of create replicas and containers, um, it gives a different the replica name is different from the FQDN. So notice that the replica has this LXB something something, right? So this one, so every time, so be sure to not put this one because the replica name can change, but FQDN stays unique. So maybe Eric, if you want to shed some light how replicas and things work and when they would change, that would help our viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of like a component of Kubernetes itself. So when you look at revisions, this allows you to have multiple different revisions of the same application. So on the screen right now, we have the demo Python application. You'll see that replica, it's showing as one. So the version, the revision is one. So you can have multiple, different versions. So you can have like you can add like another revision, call it like V2 as an example. And what that would do is then you can actually then manage the traffic to be, you could do some testing. So basically you could do like A/B testing. So basically, test it, then switch over to the new revision. You can decide if you want to send traffic like 80-20% for testing purposes to see if it's going to work. And if you're happy with it, then you would switch over the entire traffic to the new version. So there's different strategies here. But this is why you would have like those different names is to really to manage those different revisions.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that those revisions didn't get reflected. Yeah, so this is the unique one, and then the revisions can change depending. Um, on your needs, but be sure to use this as the backend. And so to complete the picture for the application gateway, other than that, these are all the normal settings. Backend setting, I will say that in the backend setting, um, I did override with the new host name. So you want to make sure that it picks up the host name from the backend setting. So that's an important call out. And then I did upload, I do have my listener for both HTTP, so I'll show you both the listeners here. So I have a wildcard certificate uploaded for Penguin Trails, and I have HTTP listener as well. They're both basic. You could have it multi-site, but I do have both of them as basic listeners. And then let me make sure you could see all of the configurations. Um, so I have, this is the public IP of the application gateway. This is where I have my custom domain mapped to. So let me show you my custom domain, which we will be validating against. So I have container app .penguintrails.com is mapped to the IP of the application gateway. Okay, so that's how I have it set up here. Um, and of course, a better practice would be create a DNS record. So let me just show you for completeness here. 10.20. So a better practice would have been to create a DNS name, for example, for the app gateway. While we are here, create a unique DNS label, and then of course use it instead of an A record. You could create a CNAME record. But for now, the container app is mapped to the application gateway here. And so coming back to application gateway to complete the full story of how this is working. We have the front end IP mapped to a custom domain, and we'll just validate that we can hit our container app. So we'll go into the And for this testing, we don't really need to be on the VM. We could test it from anywhere because this is publicly accessible. So let's go ahead and try a few different variations of how you can run the test. So I'll first try with HTTP directly to the IP, and that works. I will try HTTPS with the IP, and it will complain about the certificate because mine is a self-signed certificate. So you could still use curl with the K command. And if you want to validate that what kind of certificate I have, you could run this command. And this command will show you that I do indeed have a self-signed certificate. So hence the error. And then let's also run the Let's also run the test with the custom domain. So we'll first do an NS lookup just to make sure, and it resolves to the public IP. Like I mentioned before, if we created a CNAME record, it would point to the DNS label that we created, and then we can hit it using the custom domain. And we get this, and then we can also do this with the HTTPS. So both HTTP and HTTPS is working. Um, I will call this out here. Right now, you are able, with Application Gateway, you are able to do end-to-end a TLS with a self-signed certificate should you decide to use that, which should not be used for production workload. But with Front Door, it will not let you do it. Again, this is just for lab. I have used a self-signed certificate. Anything else, Eric, before we go to Front Door? I just want to make sure I've covered all the points.
No, you've covered it all. I think even providing the giving a DNS name to the IP address of the application gateway was a great call out. And I just love like kind of like the testing, with the curl, but also with the OpenSSL command. It's easy to or forget to how to troubleshoot SSL certificates sometimes. And that was a great call out because even I sometimes forget about it. So it's a great reference point.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, these are some of the notes kind of all getting translated into a video we could reference for sure. Yeah, and I forgot to mention about these health probes. Be sure to have these health probes set up correctly, and there's this nice little test button that if you misconfigured it, like I mentioned before, I had the replica name instead of the FQDN, it would fail. So be sure that this is nice and green for both HTTP and HTTPS. Um, so this is how my setting looks over here. So the health probes are custom health probes, and the backend settings are important for the host name overrides. So it actually uses the right host header, which becomes more important for HTTPS certificates to work. The SNI header becomes important for HTTPS to work end to end. So I'll just show you both of these for completeness. And hostname override, it calls out pick the host name from the backend target. So that completes kind of for completeness, jumping back to the draw.io. What we just finished was, let me hide the DNS layer. What we just tested was this user hitting the app gateway directly with both custom domain, IP address, and various ways to access it publicly. So with that, we're ready to now go into the front door piece. So with front door, let me hide. With front door, the way this would work is we would hit the front door, and that will in turn be integrated with the app gateway, and we will no longer be able to hit it directly using the app gateway. Again, we call this out in the container app integration directly with front door in the previous scenario. But here, when you're integrating the app gateway with front door, that is also not supported as it says over here. I should have highlighted. Let me fix that here. That even application gateway, we need to use PowerShell and AZCLI. Okay, so let me walk you through the steps. In the interest of time, I've already staged everything in the portal. But the way this would work is, let's look at the front door configuration. I have numbered the steps. So for this orange line to work correctly, in other words, for you to have this back app gateway as the origin, um, there are literally 7 steps involved, and with this feature being in preview, there are some steps that are AZCLI. So step number 3, the one that's color coded in red, is the one that's needed to be done via PowerShell. So let's walk through all of the numbers. So the first step is to create the AFD profile and endpoint. Then the next step comes on the app gateway side. You have to create the PLS, the private link service on the app gateway. Um, Now, I've done deep dive videos on PLS and private link, so be sure to check those out. Here, the next step happens on the front door side. This has to be done through the PowerShell, of course, or AZCLI. Of course, you can do all of them through AZ CLI, but the important thing to call out is that it needs this private link sub resource type, and that's the one that you will get when you do the step number 2, which is on the app gateway side. Now, again, you do the number 3 on the front door side, and then you have to approve this private endpoint request on the app gateway side. This is an often forgotten or missed step. So remember that this needs to be done on the app gateway side. And then the last few steps are, of course, once all of that integration is done, add the route to the endpoint on the front door side, and these two custom domain and NSGs are optional, although best practice to do both of these. And we showed you how to do the custom domain earlier, so that steps remains very similar. And of course, lock down the app gateway subnet with the NSG so that the user can no longer access it directly and they have to go through front door. So quite a lot here. I'll pause and take a breather here. Anything, Eric, you want to add?
AZCLI or Azure PowerShell is your friend. So
Yeah, and this is still in preview for both container apps and application gateway. So be sure to kind of have AZCLI as your friend for sure. And I have, for my own kind of documentation, if you do use this draw.io, I have, I've created screen captures because it's something that I forget is how does that manifest in end to end. This is the critical the private link sub resource type, and this is the part that is needed for this whole integration to work. Everything else kind of self-explanatory if you are familiar with private link service concept, the provider and consumer model. Remember that App Gateway in this case is the provider and the front door is the consumer. So that's the fundamental PLS concept. Again, be sure to check out the different deep dive video links below if you want to study or learn more about PLS consumer provider model. And we can also do custom domain with this. So which in the interest of time, I've already created it. So let's go jump in the portal. So here we are in the front door profile. We'll start with the front door manager, and you will notice that the way I have labeled this is the PLS with the app gateway. So we open that one, and let's look at the origin group. So this origin group has one origin, which is containerapps.penguintrails.com. As you know, it's publicly resolvable. However, in this case, it's integrated using PLS. So not to confuse that with the fact that it is publicly resolvable. It's behind the scene. It is using that um, private endpoint and PLS integration to access this origin. Okay, so let me, and again, this has to be done through CLI, so you may not see this lit up, but that's done through the private endpoint. And let's look at the domains. I do have, let's look at the PLS route. And I do have another custom domain. It says afdappgateway.penguintrails.com. So this particular route has two domains, this one and this one, this particular endpoint. So we'll grab this endpoint and we'll run some validations. So coming back on the CLI over here. So we're nearing the last part. So we'll first do, let's clear the screen. I just have this in my paste buffer. So we'll just do NS lookup of that. That's directly going to Azure Front Door. And then we will also done either NS lookup or dig for that custom domain I have. And that also is a C name to the azurefrontdoor.net. Okay, so that's that integration. And then we're ready to run the curl command here. And there, now it should go using custom domain to the using custom domain to the to the front door and then to the app gateway. And we can of course run directly. We could run it to the front door without the custom domain as well. That should work, and that works as well. And here it is, as you notice that in both the cases I used HTTP. Now let's see what happens when we try to use HTTPS. You get it fails. So let's try to figure out and do some troubleshooting. Now I have this command ready over here. So this is a very useful command. The reason it gives us the reason why it's failing. And you can see that it's failing because origin certificate is self-signed. So it's important that for Azure Front Door to work end-to-end TLS with end-to-end TLS, you do need an authentic certificate. I have links to all of this below, but be sure to use an authentic certificate. Otherwise, in my lab, this is not working. Okay, so I can only test it with HTTP. So as you saw, HTTP does work. Anything else, Eric? I missed any other validations we should do? That is the end of my validation setup.
Yeah, no, I think, the validation steps are bang on, and I think it again, SSL is, just like DNS is can be sometimes tricky. I love how you're calling out, this extra troubleshooting step, for people to use, because this is a real world step of troubleshooting SSL access, right, or HTTPS.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, SSL and DNS are like, a lot of issues happen over there. So Yeah, so that completes the internal mode, and now we are ready to dive into outbound. So what does that mean? So let's think of it from the perspective. Outbound is from the perspective of this container app, right? So let's look at the outbound scenarios. So we have two options when it comes to outbound. If you didn't do anything, this container app will egress to the internet using Azure provided default outbound IPs. But if you want deterministic IPs, you could either create a NAT gateway and do that, or you could use outbound using Azure Firewall or Network Virtual Appliance. Of course, when you use the Network Virtual Appliance or Azure Firewall, you want to enable UDRs, subnet level UDRs, or a quad 0/0 route pointing to Azure Firewall or NVA. I've done deep dive videos on kind of Azure networking in general, but these are the options that you have from a container um, app perspective. So let's run a quick demo of the NAT gateway. So first, let's go on the container app. And this is why the tools that I have installed on this container becomes very, very important. So we have curl already installed. So I'll just run ifconfig.me before. We'll run it a couple of times, and you can see that it cycles through two IPs. So this is how it egresses using the default Azure provided IPs. So now let's put this container app, let's associate this subnet where this container app environment is with the NAT gateway. So here I'll go to the NAT gateways. I already have a NAT gateway provision. And for completeness, let's just make sure, and I'll open this in a new tab, that we are grabbing the right subnet. So if you go to the container app environment, you could see that it's associated with the internal container app dash internal subnet. So let's go to the settings, subnets, and let's just make sure that we are associating the container app internal subnet with the NAT gateway. So this is my NAT gateway. Now I'm just associating it here. We'll just save this, and we'll run the same exercise again. And what we expect is that after it's done successfully, which it looks like it is, our app, a container app will egress using this IP. All right, so let's go ahead and test that again. It's the last octet was 88 is all I remember. We'll give it a few. There we go. It took a few seconds, but you could see that now we are egressing using 85.88. So that's how easy it is to integrate. It is indeed a best practice if you want deterministic IP. So anything else, Eric, you would like to add to this egress scenario? Do you see this common? I know you work more in the field. Anything else that you see more common?
Um, no, I think that egressing through a NAT gateway is what I would see more often. Um, just probably one quick call out about the NAT gateway is around we didn't really spend a whole lot of time when we were doing the deployment of it, but when you're doing a deployment of Azure Container Apps, there are different environments that you can pick. So there would be like a workload profile versus a consumption profile. And the NAT gateways only support on the workload profile and not the consumption. So just a little gotcha that I've seen in the past. But that would be the only things I would call out.
Great point. Thanks, Eric. Yes, we did indeed miss the configuration um, bits when it comes to workload profile. Yeah, thanks for that call out. Yeah, so now I think we're ready to jump on to our next scenario, which is the one with the multi-region. So let me make sure that I have the right layers highlighted here. So here we are seeing the multi-region part. And the way the flows will work with multi-region is, of course, you could have an active or active standby, but you would have front door and the app gateway as the origin to the front door using the integration. Now, with the new private endpoint feature that we showed you earlier, of course, this will directly hit the container app without hitting the app gateway. We'll do another video when that feature goes into production or into GA. But for now, this is the design that we've used for our multi-region design. Anything you would like to add here, Eric?
No, this is, like a great architecture for multi-region deployments. This is, a little bit more of an active passive, design. But, like you could have, another deployment, somewhere in Europe or Asia, where you could have, where you could bring the application slightly closer to your users, and then for access and speed. And On a personal, I love the bow tie configuration for the Express Gateway.
You still have roots into networking, Eric, for sure.
I do, I do.
uh, awesome. Thanks for that call out. Yeah, so there is a lot that happens, of course, other than the application high availability, like Eric called out, there is network and routing high availability as well. And I have done other videos on these kind of designs, so be sure to check that out. And with that, we are at the last part of our demo, Eric. So we're going to go into the troubleshooting section. I do think that I covered various bits while we were doing it, but I've created a separate layer for troubleshooting for all the different things that I've personally ran into, and I've kept track of those errors. So this one, remember I mentioned to check out backend health on the application gateway. And as you can see here, the mistake I did was I had that little that would be the replica, I think,
Yes.
and that's what I had instead of the FQDN, and my probes were coming out um, unhealthy. So that's one. I showed you that always run curl with the I, and you want to look for 200 okay. If you get 502 like I was showing you here, I think I showed you a live demo of this, is because App Gateway is using a self-signed certificate. um, this is the one about the replica. I once didn't have the replica. And again, this is me not viewing it as a developer. I bring the network eyes. So I completely missed that it wasn't running. It had 0 replicas, and no wonder my connection was failing. This is another mistake I did, where I kept waiting for the domain, the custom domain, to get approved, and noticed that I just did a copy and paste of the record, and I had this twice. It accepted it, but it didn't validate my domain. And then this screen capture is showing you that for end-to-end TLS, you do need valid certificate. And this is, if you click on this, if you download this Draw.io and click on this, it will take you right to the part of the documentation that calls out that front door expects your origin to present a valid certificate. So while it worked with App Gateway, I was stuck with it for a long time until I decided to read the documentation. And sure enough, it doesn't let you do it for security reasons. With that, I do want to call out that the way these Draw.io diagrams are structured is that one of the reasons I started this project was to not have to lab certain things again and again. So be sure to check out some of these optional layers, and I'll show you a full view of this with all the layers lighted up, so that you could see that I have a lot of optional layers where if you do want to look at how things are configured, um, don't have to lab it again. If I have screen captures of a working lab, it saves me time to do labs. As an architect, you know, when you have to get on a call with the customer, you would have these screen captures ready and know that this does work indeed in the lab. Okay, so those are some of the call outs. Any last thoughts, Eric? Before we break.
No, thank you for having me. This has been, a lot of fun, really interesting. I love all the different layers, but also specifically all the troubleshooting steps because this is something I feel like we forget sometimes, and just having it there, quickly and just to see what commands to run is fantastic. So definitely, use this.
Thanks, Eric, for joining me today. As always, I enjoy working with you. You bring really this amazing and unique perspective. You know a lot about networking, a lot about app dev, and you're my hero. So I
Oh,
hope to
thank
do
you.
more sessions with you in the future. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us for part 2 of this recording. And we will see you in the next video.